few years ago, I made a video called You Haven't Played Your Favourite Video Game. In it, I looked at how we consider our favourite game of all time, and how we value the experiences a game provides. The conclusion of that video was, as the thumbnail shows, simply play more games. But one thing I didn't discuss in that video is how we go about discovering new games. So with Summer Game Fest having just happened, we were introduced to a lot of new games coming up over the next couple of years, an overwhelming amount in fact. And the focus of the discussion around Summer Game Fest is so often around the big showcases and big reveals. They've obviously got the biggest marketing budgets to get people's eyes on them, and new entries in established franchises will always attract massive amounts of attention. A lot of people were pretty disappointed with the main Summer Game Fest showcase because of its lack of big reveals from big franchises, but I'm actually in the opposite camp. Yes, it was very long and there wasn't a ton that drew my attention, but overall I think that showcase had some really great reveals. Not specifically in terms of individual games, but for the future of the games industry, in particular the indie space. I'm mainly talking about three elements of the show. The first was Jeff Keighley's intro monologue, in which he addressed the recent industry layoffs, something people have been wanting him to use his platform for a long while, but also because of his focus on how the biggest games of this year so far, specifically based on the Steam player numbers, were indie titles. So going into the show, I was hoping he was going to put his money where his mouth was, and actually showcase some indies, or lesser known games, which I think he largely did, giving highlights to solo developed projects that he specifically invited, so they didn't have to pay the ludicrous costs towards having a game showcased at one of these events. And that was pretty nice. Second was the showcase from Blumhouse Games, a new initiative from Blumhouse, famously a producer of indie horror films, moving into the video game space. They showed off some really interesting looking indie horror games, pushing forward a lot of what we've seen over the last couple of years with games like Signalis and Crow Country. And the third was the announcement of Outer Sloth, a new publishing label / indie fund from Inner Sloth, developers of the massively successful Among Us. They're using their platform and the money they have made and continue to make from that game to give back to the industry and help small developers get their games out there. These were all great signs of big names using their influence to promote smaller, more artistic titles, which, as I've stated in my last video, I believe is the creative backbone of the games industry, and something we are seeing more and more of. Big time YouTuber Ludwig recently announcing his push into games publishing with off-brand games, and of course Dunkey with his publishing company Big Mode, proving that the dream is certainly possible with the massive critical success of Animal Well. Of course, you then have the more indie-focused showcases, Wholesome Games Showcase, Day of the Devs, Guerrilla Collective, etc., that showcase huge numbers of wonderful looking indie games. But the issue with the bigger showcases, in particular the Xbox showcase, is most of these games are coming out years later, and we won't be able to touch them for a very long time. For the smaller showcases, in particular the Wholesome Games Showcase, the majority of the games announced had demos available on Steam as soon as the showcase was live, giving everyone the opportunity to play these games for free there and then. And that of course comes as part of Steam Next Fest, a something like tri-yearly festival hosted on Steam showcasing hundreds if not thousands of demos from mainly indie but also AA developers. This is how we discover our next favourite game, not by simply watching showcases, but by getting actual hands-on looks at the best looking upcoming games. I am very lucky in that I had the opportunity to play more demos this year than I have before, so I'm going to talk about a few of my favourites for you today. There was a massive range of games on show, from cozy farming games to interesting twists on roguelikes to weird dungeon crawlers and a shocking amount of nostalgic sports games. If you like what you see in any of these games, do go and wishlist them on Steam. It massively helps out developers with pitching to publishers and getting their games pushed up in the Steam algorithm. Also, please like the video and subscribe if you want to see more from me, and follow me over on Twitch where I stream on the odd occasion, link down below. Without further ado, let's see if we can find your next favourite game. Dungeons of Hinterberg, developed by Microbird Games, is one that I've had on my radar ever since it was first announced last year, and that has certainly drummed up a lot of buzz around it with each trailer and gameplay snippet released. Aiding to its striking visual design and vivid pastel colour palette, intriguing modern fantasy world, and most importantly, its variety of 3D Zelda-inspired dungeons. I had the opportunity to participate in the game's playtest a couple of months ago, and I honestly wasn't blown away by it. The combat felt simple and a little rigid, the visuals of the dungeon on offer left a lot to be desired, and the focus on social mechanics in having to befriend people around this kind of ski resort type village wasn't to my taste at all. But that was of course a playtest, a very thin early slice of what's to come, to give the developers feedback on technical issues and other things within the game. So hearing there was going to be a more expansive demo available in the June Next Fest, I was very keen to get my teeth stuck in and see how the game had been improved with a bigger variety of dungeons on offer. While this demo is of course short, just one new dungeon and overworld setting, it has got me a lot more excited for the full release. It introduces new magic mechanics, the standout being a hoverboard you get to play with throughout this demo, as well as a kind of light beam used for combat and flicking switches for puzzles, reminiscent of God of War's rune puzzles. It introduces you to and teaches you about these abilities in the overworld, a sort of mini hub section, which in itself feels like a sub-dungeon, with combat encounters and puzzles, but it contains the other dungeons you will engage with. The dungeon itself is both visually and mechanically fantastic. It takes on this beautiful pale icy blue with crystalline structures and crumbling ruins, reminiscent of the overworld but also feeling like you've been transported into an interdimensional cave, which I feel is exactly what this game is going for. But this dungeon also consists of Super Mario Galaxy-like islands that you can walk around the entirety of. This, alongside the grinding rails and speeding over jumps on the hoverboard, reminded me a lot of Solar Ash, released back in 2021. This game feels like it's going to be a wonderful homage to the history of action-adventure and dungeon-crawling video games. Not only do you play as a tourist, but you feel like one, experiencing little snippets of the past in a package that, despite its clear influence, feels nicely fresh in the modern video game landscape. The combat does still feel a little rigid, but with a good variety of mythical creatures thrown at you to keep you moving and using your different abilities. And the social aspects of the game lead to some pretty tedious, cringe-inducing dialogue sections. The relationships you form with the townsfolk is also the way in which you add permanent upgrades to your equipment and health, etc. So I'm hoping that this doesn't take too much time away from the excellent dungeon crawling in the full release. Dungeons of Hinterberg is slated for release on the 18th of July on Steam for PC and Xbox Series consoles. Being a long-time fan of Game Maker's Toolkit, there was no way I was going to skip the opportunity to play Mind Over Magnet, the first official game from Mark Brown at, well, Game Maker's Toolkit, the massively influential game design YouTube channel. This is a 2D level-based puzzle platformer, where you play as a little CRT monitor-headed robot guy trying to make his way back up to his factory. You can see design influences from the get-go, taking tutorial tricks from the likes of the Mario games and other puzzlers like Baba Is You, to teach you how the game works, without telling you explicitly how the game works. This is done through steady introduction to mechanics one at a time, allowing you to solve more and more complex puzzles to cement these ideas in your head going forward. The game feels really nice to control, implementing speedy movement for the character, and a great Celeste/Hollow Knight style tiered jump, depending on how long you hold the button down for. The puzzles in this demo were not mind-bending by any means, but did have me thinking for a few moments before getting the satisfying aha moment in discovering the solution. And you can see how they will ramp up with the addition of more types of magnets and other systems teased at the end of the demo. The game doesn't currently have a solid release date, but is scheduled to launch in 2024. And if you want to look back at the development of the game, Mark has a fantastic devlog series over on the GMTK YouTube channel, which you should definitely check out if you live under a rock and haven't already. Developed by TinyRaw, Into the Emberlands is an isometric town-building exploration game with roguelite influences. It's a pretty simple concept and gameplay loop where you venture out from your village to gather up wood and stone, as well as rescue lost wanderers and bring it all back to rebuild. But the twist is that you have a limit on how far you can explore. You're a light bearer, and the light that you bear has a steadily reducing amount of ember based on how many blocks you travel before it burns out and you die and have to restart your run. But your light will refill when you return to your village, as well as from certain pickups and randomly spawning locations out in the world. This adds a nice amount of tension to the game, making you plan out just how far away from safety you want to venture. Alongside this, you have tools with a limited number of uses. They're used for chopping trees and breaking rocks to gather resources, but also to clear your path deeper into the forest. This gives the game an almost puzzle box feeling, weirdly reminiscent of something like Captain Toad, where you need to navigate to certain key items and characters to trade your resources for upgrades, while also having enough to bring back to your village, and not trapping yourself with a short enough route home. Death is also not a massive burden in this game. When you die, your village stays as it is, but you respawn as a new villager, without any of the upgrades you had previously, and the world will rearrange itself, making it fairly easy to go back out and gather enough resources to get yourself back up to speed. I ended up putting over an hour and a half into a single run in this game, and didn't want to put it down once the demo came to a close. It's a great exploration game that doesn't overburden itself with the roguelikeness of it, taking just enough influence to keep the game feeling like you are making good progress with each trip out from the village. Into the Emberlands is slated for a 2024 release, with no specific date set just yet. Now, let's pick up the pace a little, shall we? This is Aero GPX, from solo developer Aaron McDevitt. I've been following development on this game for quite a while now. Anti-gravity racers make up a significant amount of my foundation with video games. I even learnt my left and right from Wipeout 2097 on PS1. So seeing this love letter to the genre, more so for F-Zero than Wipeout, I was incredibly excited to see where it goes. I even contributed to the game's Kickstarter campaign back in 2022. So seeing this get the full Next Fest demo treatment, I was of course excited to play the game again, but more so for others to experience it for themselves. This game grabs the essence of what makes this genre so great, the speed, over-the-top art design, looping track design, and turns it all the way up. Alongside the soundtrack by artist Myron, it will be hard to find a game that feels this fast, while also feeling this good to play. Tight controls and hefty feedback on collisions and when using attacks fully suck you into the experience. And when you get into a real flow, it can become an almost trance-like experience. It's definitely hard to go into a whole lot of detail talking about a game like this. It's a high-speed arcade racer, and one that certainly feels like it could stand up proudly next to the best in the history of the genre. Aero GPX launches into early access on Steam on August 6th. And as mentioned earlier in this video, this isn't the only nostalgic arcade racer at this Steam Next Fest. Let's have a look at another one, shall we? Victory Heat Rally from developer Sky Devil Palm is a self-proclaimed love letter to arcade racers like Power Drift and Outrun, and you can feel that love running through every pixel. I've seen this game on Twitter a good amount over the past year or so, and it always catches my attention because of its obviously striking visuals. One thing I was always skeptical of though was how it actually felt to play. The exaggerated drift animation always looked like it would feel a little floaty and not match the way the car actually felt. As soon as I started my first lap actually playing this game, that skepticism was thrown right out the window. It feels absolutely fantastic to control these cars. The drifting is tight, with a drift boost mechanic anyone who has played Mario Kart will be familiar with. The sheer speed of this game is also just awesome. It is as fast as those early arcade racers felt, and perfectly timing the drift boost to kick you straight out of a corner is unbelievably satisfying. The music is a pounding homage to 90s arcade nostalgia, with an electrifying modern breakcore twist. The character design is charming and again blends the over-the-top, brash design of the era it is inspired by with a modern, cartoonish twist. This is a love letter in the truest sense, and I cannot wait to play the full release. Victory Heat Rally is pegged for release winter 2024 for Steam and Nintendo Switch. Wild Bastards is a follow-up to 2019's Void Bastards, developed by Blue Manchu, and while not a sequel, you can definitely see the Void Bastards DNA running through this game. I've not played Void Bastards, so I can't speak too much to the crossover mechanic, but the bold, cartoonish art style is back, this time with a cowboy theme, rather than the System Shock-inspired sci-fi of the first, and the zany caricature humour both of these titles put at the forefront. And this highlights another great thing about these Next Fests. It gives us an opportunity to have a hands-on introduction to a series of games we may not have experienced before, or that have been on our radars and got lost in the backlog of releases over the years. Wild Bastards is a tactical roguelike first-person shooter. You navigate a spaceship through various star systems via a chart-like map, choosing locations based on loot or upgrades you may gather in them. Then you beam down to the planet and are greeted by another map with more branching paths to navigate for stores, specific upgrades, character unlocks, and so on. Similar to other roguelikes like Slay the Spire or Inscription for reference. This has an interesting board game-like structure in that you only have a specific amount of moves to a turn before you have to end, and certain enemies can move around and block your path. This is also where the tactical part of the game's description comes in. When you have multiple paths to choose from, including teleporters and other ways of skipping certain sections, you do have to fight certain blockading enemies to unlock roads to reach other parts of the map. These combat encounters are quick, arena-based first-person shooting sections, in which you will take in up to 2 of your party members, which you can switch on the fly. These characters feel very distinct from one another, so switching between them is pretty vital to clear an arena. One might have a bit more range with a revolver, when another has a shotgun, so think of switching between them like switching weapons in another FPS game. The shooting is fun and pretty tough at times, definitely aiding a more ranged playstyle than anything else from what I experienced, but I'm sure upgrades and equipment can be used to help out the closer range characters. This definitely has put Void Bastards back on my radar to tide me over until Wild Bastards release in September, coming to all platforms except Switch. Kill Knight isn't just the most intense game I've played at this Next Fest, it's one of the most intense games I've ever played full stop. An isometric twin-stick shooter developed by Playside. It is a rapid, responsive, pounding, non-stop brawler against hordes of enemies. The game pretty heavily insists on you going through the tutorial before playing, and rightly so. You have to learn multiple weapons, projectile and melee, active reloads and dodge patterns, all of which have to be balanced perfectly through each run. I think a pretty apt way of describing it is Doom meets Vampire Survivors. Doom because of the crunchy combat, dark gory visuals and heavy driving soundtrack, but also because you need to utilise all of your different attack types to replenish ammo and health, and Vampire Survivors because of the non-stop waves of enemies and constant upgrade pickups. But this isn't a passive game like Vampire Survivors, you have to be engaged at all times, dodging and keeping an eye on your shots to get buffs from perfectly timed active reloads. This game is just pure chaotic fun, and definitely one that I will sink hours into, much like I did with Vampire Survivors. There's no solid release date just yet, but it is slated for later this year.
You've got to get a hold of yourself.
Parcel Corps is definitely one of the games I heard most about going into this Steam Next Fest, whether through word of mouth or Instagram ads. Everyone seems all aflutter about this upcoming bikeathon from Irish studio Billy Goat Entertainment, published by Secret Mode. Two companies I'd never heard of, and looking into their histories, there isn't much on there that would put them on many people's radars as far as I can tell. So the buzz around this game is purely because it looks fantastic. A mashup between a Jet Set Radio or Bomb Rush Cyberpunk for all you new indie heads, and Crazy Taxi, with a visual style and soundtrack that perfectly match that tone. You play as one of a few different bike messengers, or couriers or delivery people, whatever you want to call them, and are tasked with delivering packages with a time limit. And with that time limit comes many creative ways of getting to your destinations. You'll jump, wall ride and grind your way around the city at frantic speeds, and the bike feels great to handle. It definitely does take some getting used to, and the controls aren't the most intuitive, but once you get used to it and can get the hang of jumping at the correct time to traverse a gap or climb a ledge, chaining together moves to get where you need to be is a real joy. Parcel Corps adds to the growing list of fast-paced 90s and 2000s nostalgia games showing up in recent years, and at this very Next Fest. Interesting. Parcel Corps releases on Steam, PS5 and Xbox Series X and S on September 3rd. Developed by Paris-based studio Plain Toast, Caravan SandWitch is a third-person, narrative-driven exploration game. I actually found out about this game a few days before Summer Game Fest and Steam Next Fest from a friend showing me the trailer, and it instantly got my attention. So finding out there was a playable demo was a nice surprise. Your character has returned to her home planet because of a distress beacon sent out by her sister. Exploration is definitely the focus of this, at least in this demo. You start at your house and are asked to drive to a nearby village, a stretch which takes about 30 seconds. But by the side of the road there are about 5 different spots to explore, pulling me out of the van to snoop around caves and some sort of power station looking building. Exploring also adds some nice mystery surrounding the titular sandwich. I wasn't told to do this, it just felt like the game wanted me to. The character feels great to control, and it seems like there will be some enjoyable puzzles out in the world. This player-driven exploration feels very reminiscent of Sable, due to the kind of mellow, semi-post-apocalyptic feeling the world puts out. Once you get to the village, you're introduced to a few characters from the protagonist's past, hinting at the narrative going forward, focusing on nostalgia, family, and the feeling you get returning home after a long time away. You're also given the task of finding components to build a tool for your caravan, which, if you've explored of your own volition, you may have found most of them already. There are a few other side tasks given in this village, largely being very simple fetch quests to introduce you to characters and your relationship to them, hinting at how the narrative might move forward. The caravan itself unfortunately didn't play a huge part in the demo. You could complete almost all of it without touching it at all, but it does give a tutorial at the end around one of the caravan's mechanics, which will be used in exploration and puzzle solving, and that has me really excited for how it will be implemented in the full release. I wish there were some bigger driving sections to get stuck into, but of course there is only so much that can be packed into one demo. This demo overall was really fun and got me more excited for the full release. I believe this is Studio Plain Toast's first game, so they're off to a fantastic start. This game seems to have grabbed a lot of attention, and for good reason. No release date yet, but looking like a 2024 launch. One thing I think demos like these are good for, beyond giving us a small slice of a game to experience and come to a conclusion about whether or not we want to buy it, is to tease us with what is to come in the full release. When I saw the first trailer for Mirthwood from Bad Ridge Games, I was instantly sold. I couldn't think any demo could sell me any further on this game. a sprawling RPG with a picture book art style reminiscent of medieval folk art, much like that of Pentiment. It reminded me of one of those art pieces you often see where someone has posed the question, what would Skyrim look like if it was released on the SNES? So when I went into the demo for Mirthwood, I kind of knew what to expect. But it is impossible to put any of the systems at play in this game into a 1 or 2 hour experience. It introduces you to farming, melee combat, cooking and crafting, morality systems, NPC relationships, exploration, hunting, and deep, thoughtful writing in main and side quests, as well as lore through letters and books found in bandit camps and houses. All these things you would expect from a deep RPG made on a AAA budget that look like they're made on a AAA budget. But this game so clearly wasn't made on a AAA budget, but is looking to have detail and depth far beyond many of the best RPGs out today. It sets up something that looks like it will be a true player-driven experience, taking the flexibility and approach of a game like Stardew Valley and putting it in a massive open world. But while this is a massive open world RPG life sim, as a nice accompaniment to the fine details of the painterly art style, it is telling intimate stories. We get a look at the start of what will surely be a meandering quest into the intricacies of familial loss. The choice of what to do when faced with someone accused of desertion, whether to kill them there and then or listen to their side of the story, your decision looking to have long-standing effects on your character further along in the game. While this many systems in a game made on a smaller budget can sound like it would be worn thin, Mirthwood balances this by having each mechanic be nicely focused. Combat is a 2-button light and heavy attack and timed parry, which is easy to grasp but I can see being tricky to master. Character relationships aren't driven by dialogue, just by prompts, hinting at each character's unique personality, giving you the opportunity to respond how you see fit, rather than from rigid speech options. Crafting, farming and inventory management are as you'd expect in this sort of game, allowing each system to work nicely together, giving the player the opportunity to focus on whatever part of the game they connect with the most. I can honestly say I have never played an indie game that looks to be quite this ambitious, and if this demo is anything to go by, I think we are in for a real all-timer on launch. Mirthwood is slated for release Q3 this year, with no solid date just yet. So those are my top 10 games I played this Steam Next Fest. Steam Next Fest continues to be the best time of year for discovering new games when it rolls around every few months, showing off the absolute top level creativity out there from indie studios, and all for free. Remember, if you liked any of the games shown here, pop them on your wish list to help the devs out, and like the video and subscribe to the channel to help me out. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will catch you all again soon.